There is a silence that two broken people can build between them that is warmer than any words. And there is another kind, the kind that falls in a great hall when a truth needs to be spoken, and the only person who knows it has no voice to speak it. I have lived inside both, and on the day everything changed, I stood inside the second one, a hall full of the realm's power, a smiling warlord about to seal a treaty in the king's own name, and me, mute, frozen, screaming a warning that made no sound at all. Because the thing I most needed to say was the one thing my ruined throat had never been able to make. I could not speak. I have not spoken in years. And the danger was standing 12 feet from the king, and I was the only soul in that hall who knew what he was, and I had no way on earth to tell them until a small boy who had not said a single word in months looked at me and understood and did the bravest thing I have ever seen a person do. But I am ahead of myself, and this story does not begin in a hall of power. It begins in a garden, with a sound the king had not heard in half a year and had begun to believe he would never hear again. His son had not spoken in months. Not to the healers, not to the king, not to anyone. Neither had I, though for a different reason. And then, one morning, the Alpha King heard laughter coming from the garden and followed it, and nothing was ever the same. My name was Runa, which I can write but have never once said aloud, because I lost my voice before I was old enough to have said much of anything worth keeping. I will not linger on how. It is enough to know that when I was a child, something happened that no child should see, in a place that no longer exists, done by a man I had spent years praying I would never see again, and that the horror of it reached into my throat and closed a door there that has never since opened. The healers who examined me over the years all said the same thing in different words. There is nothing wrong with her tongue, nothing wrong with her throat. The voice is simply gone, locked behind a fear too large for a small body to hold. I understood my own silence better than any of them. It was not that I could not make sound. It was that the last sound I ever tried to make was a scream that no one came for, and some part of me had decided, wisely, never to spend a scream on an empty room again. So I grew up voiceless, and I learned the 1,000 small skills the voiceless. Learned to watch, to listen, to say with my hands and my face and my stillness what others say with their mouths. And I made my way, as the wordless do, into the kind of work that does not require speech. And I came at last to the palace of the Iron Reach as the lowest kind of servant, the kind who scrubs and carries and is spoken over rather than to, which suited me, because being spoken over. And in that palace there was a boy who had gone as silent as I was. His name was Finn, and he was the Alpha King's son, 6 years old, and his mother, the Luna, had died half a year before. A fever, a hard winter, the ordinary cruelty that takes the people we cannot spare, and the boy had stopped speaking the week she was buried, and had not said a word since. The whole palace grieved and worried over him. Healers came, tutors came, his father, the king, came, though less easily than the others. And that is a part of the story I will get to. And Finn spoke to none of them, because his grief was too large for his small body to hold. And he had done exactly what I had done at his age, closed the door in his throat rather than spend his words on a world that had taken the one person he most wanted to say them to. I understood him the moment I saw him. That is the whole of why it worked. Everyone else in that palace looked at a silent child and saw a problem to be solved, a wrongness to be corrected, a boy who must be coaxed and pressed and healed back into speech. I looked at him and saw myself, and I knew the one thing none of them knew, which was that you cannot coax a locked door open. You can only sit beside it quietly, wanting nothing, until the one behind it decides on its own that it is safe to come out. So that is what I did. I did not try to make him speak. I, of all people, was not going to demand words from a child who had none to give. I simply began to be where he was, in the corners of the palace where a grieving boy goes to be unwatched, which are the same corners a mute servant goes to be unbothered, and I let him see that I wanted nothing from him, no words, no progress, no proof that he was healing. And slowly, the way a wild thing comes to a still hand, he came to me. We built a language with no words in it, Finn and I, and it was the richest conversation of my life. We had signs, small ones, invented between us, a private grammar of hands and glances that meant, come here and look at that, and I am sad today, and let us hide from the tutor. We had games that needed no speaking, and we had the garden, which is where the king eventually found us. So I must tell you about the garden. It had been the Luna's garden, Finn's mother's, a walled green place she had loved, and since her death no one had tended it, and no one had gone into it. Because grief seals things, and the whole palace had silently agreed to let her garden go to ruin rather than face it. Which made it, of course, the perfect place for the two of us, the mute servant and the silent prince, the palace's two unfaceable wounds, to go where no one would follow. We began, without ever deciding to bring it back. We pulled the weeds, we freed the smothered roses, we coaxed a dead place toward life with our hands in silence, and it was the first thing since his mother died that made the boy's face open. And I had one thing, one small thing, that turned out to be the key to all of it. I could not speak, but I could make music. A voiceless throat is not a silent body. I had a little reed pipe I had carried for years, and though I could not sing or say a single word, I could play. And music, it turns out, is the language that lives on the far side of speech, where Finn and I both already were. I would sit in his mother's reviving garden and play the small, foolish tunes I knew, and the boy who had not made a sound in months would listen. And one morning, over some silly, hopping melody, something broke loose in him that grief had been sitting on, and he laughed. He laughed, a real child's laugh, bright and startled. The first sound of joy that garden had heard since the woman who made it died. And I kept playing, and he kept laughing, the two of us, wordless and unlonely, in a walled green place, and neither of us knew that on the far side of the garden wall the Alpha King had stopped in his tracks. Because the king had been looking for that sound for half a year, and had stopped believing he would ever hear it. His name was Orin, and he was not what I had expected a king to be, though it took me a long while to understand him, because he hid himself better than any man I have known. The songs called him Iron. The palace called him Cold. And he was cold, grave, contained, rigid, with a discipline that never slipped. But I had spent my life reading people from the outside, since I could not converse with them from within, and I saw, before I had any right to, that the king's coldness was not the absence of feeling. It was a wall, built over a flood. He had lost his mate, the Luna. The same winter his son lost his mother, and where the boy had gone silent, the father had gone rigid, had locked his grief behind an iron control, and thrown himself into the machinery of ruling, and had handled his own broken heart the only way a proud man knows how, which is to refuse to let anyone, including himself, see that it was broken. And that same pride was failing his son, though he could not see it, because Orin, unable to bear his own grief, had turned Finn's silence into a problem to be managed, had summoned the healers, demanded the tutors, pressed the boy to speak with the same grim discipline he brought to everything, treating his son's locked throat as a fault to be corrected rather than a wound to be sat beside. He loved Finn desperately. He simply loved him the way a proud, controlled, grief-frozen man loves, which is to say from behind a wall, in the language of solutions and expectations, and the boy, who needed presence, not pressure, had retreated further from his father with every attempt to fix him. The king had followed the laughter that morning, expecting, I think, to find some trick, some healer's success, some explanation he could control. What he found instead was his son, in his dead wife's garden, laughing at the pipe playing of a mute servant girl, in a place the king himself had not been able to enter since the funeral. And I looked up from my pipe and saw the Alpha King of the Iron Reach standing in the gateway of his wife's garden, with his iron control cracking straight down the middle, because he was watching his son be happy, genuinely happy, for the first time since her death, and the person who had given him that was a girl with no voice at all. Doing the one thing the king in all his power, and all his healers, had not managed, which was simply to want nothing from the boy but his company. I braced to be dismissed. A servant does not draw the king's son into a dead woman's garden. I knew how it looked, how far above my place I had reached, but the king did not dismiss me. He stood in that gateway and watched, and something happened to his face that I had never seen happen to it, the iron going soft and terrible all at once, and he did not speak either. The three of us for a long moment, all wordless together, and then he came into the garden. His grief had sealed for half a year. And he sat down on the grass a little apart from us, and he said, very low, to no one, "Play it again, please." I have not heard him laugh since his mother died. I played it again. And the King of the Iron Reach sat in his dead wife's garden, and watched his son laugh, and wept, silently, without any shame, the wall down at last, broken open, as he told me much later, by the one thing his iron had never been able to defend against, which was his child's joy. Handed to him by a girl who could not say a word. If you have ever been the still hand a wounded thing finally comes to, and watched a locked door open that everyone else had tried to force, then you know the fierce tenderness that grew in me in that garden, for the boy, and though I fought it, for his broken father. I am going to tell you why a mute servant's past came walking into the king's hall in a warlord's fine cloak, and how a girl with no voice and a boy with no words found between them the one voice that could stop him. Stay with me to the treaty, and the scream that made no sound. The wordless language Finn and I built to comfort each other turned out to be the only thing standing between the Iron Reach and a monster. The monster came to court in the spring, and he came smiling with an alliance in his hands. His name was Alphadation, and he ruled a territory to the north, and he had come to the Iron Reach to negotiate a treaty, a great alliance of two powers, sealed by trade and oaths, and the promise of shared strength against the wild borders. He was charming, he was powerful. King Orin, who needed the Northern Alliance and saw in Dacian a fellow strong ruler, was inclined to trust him, and the whole court prepared to welcome the treaty that would bind the two territories together. And I knew, the instant I saw Dacian's face across the great hall, that he was the man who had taken my voice. I will not make you live the recognition with me. It is enough to say that the place that no longer exists, the thing no child should see, the man I had prayed for years I would never see again, it was him. Alphadation had raised my home when I was small, had done the things that warlords do and call conquest, and had left a child screaming in an empty ruin until the child stopped forever. He did not know me. Why would he? I had been one small, nameless survivor of a thing he had done to hundreds, and children grow, and a mute servant in a rival king's palace is beneath the notice of a man come to seal a great alliance. He looked straight through me, the way everyone looked through me, and felt perfectly safe. And I understood, standing frozen in that hall, the exact shape of the trap my whole life had been building toward. I knew what Dacian was. I knew that the king was about to bind his realm to a monster. That whatever the treaty promised, a man who had done what Dacian had done to my home would do it again. That the alliance was a door being opened to something that should never be let in. I was the one person in the Iron Reach who knew it, and I could not say a single word. Do you understand what that is? To carry the one truth that matters, the truth that could save a kingdom, and to have no way to release it, to open your mouth and have nothing come out, to have the scream locked behind the same door his own cruelty had locked years before. It was the cruelest thing he ever did to me, and he did it without even knowing I was there. He had taken my voice as a child, and now, as a woman, I needed that voice to stop him, and he had made certain, years ago, that I would never have it. I want to tell you I've found some clever way, but the truth is that for days I nearly broke under it. I tried. I am literate. I taught myself letters the way the voiceless teach themselves everything, out of desperation, and I tried to write it down, to put a warning into the king's hands. But a mute servant thrusting a wild written accusation at a king against his honoured guest is a mad servant, a jealous servant, a servant to be gently removed, and I had no proof but my own memory and my own terror. And Dacian was charming and powerful and expected, and I was nobody with no voice. I got no further than the edges of it. The treaty moved toward its ceiling, and I understood that the wordless were about to lose a kingdom because the world does not listen to those it has silenced. But I had forgotten the one thing that was truly mine, which was not my absent voice. It was the boy. Finn had seen me go strange and grey when Dacian came. Of course he had. We spoke a language with no words in it, he and I. And there is no hiding fear from someone who has learned to read you without speech. He had watched me try and fail to make anyone understand. And Finn, 6 years old, silent for half a year, knew 2 things that no one else in that palace knew. He knew that I was afraid of the smiling northern alpha. In a way, I had never been afraid of anything. And he knew, because we had built a whole language on it, exactly what I was trying to say, and could not. And on the day the treaty was to be sealed, in the great hall before the whole court, my silent boy did the bravest thing I have ever seen. That is the hall the cold open promised you. The court assembled, the oath prepared, Alpha Dacian smiling at the king's side, and me at the wall among the servants, mute, frozen, my whole body a scream that could make no sound. The king lifted the treaty, and I looked across that hall in pure helpless terror, and my eyes found Finn where he stood, near his father, and the boy looked back at me, and I saw him understand what I needed, and I saw him decide. He walked out into the middle of the great hall, the silent prince, the boy who had not spoken since his mother died, and he stood in front of his father and the assembled court, and he opened his mouth, and he used the first words he had spoken in half a year to say the thing I could not. "Papa, don't!" His voice was small and rusty, and it shook, and the whole hall froze at the sound of it, the prince speaking the miracle of it. "Don't sign it. The northern man hurt Runa. He hurt her home. She knows him. She's been trying to tell you, and she can't, because he broke her voice, and she's my friend, and she's scared, and you have to listen because she can't say it herself." He turned and looked at me, my brave, silent boy, finding his words at last, and he said, "I'll say it for her. She doesn't have a voice, so she can use mine. Runa says the northern man is a monster, and I believe her. I have heard many sounds in my silent life, watched them from the outside, envied them. I have never heard anything like the sound of a grieving child breaking half a year of silence to lend his voice to a friend who had none. It broke the hall open. It broke the king open. And it broke Dacian's composure, because a charming warlord can talk his way past a mute servant's madness, but he cannot talk his way past a king's own son, naming him a monster in front of the entire court. Not when the naming makes the king turn and look, truly look, at his honoured guest with a father's cold new suspicion. Dacian did what cornered monsters do. He had come with men, as warlords do, and when he saw the treaty collapse and the king's face turn, he moved to seize the leverage nearest to hand, which was the child who had exposed him, the prince standing exposed in the middle of the hall. He lunged for Finn, and I, who had frozen for days, who could not make a sound, found that there was one thing my silence had never taken from me, which was the ability to move. I was across that hall before I knew I had left the wall, and I put myself between Alpha Dacian and my boy, and the blade that had been meant to take a hostage went into me instead. A bright cold line and a wash of heat, and I wrapped my arms around Finn and turned my body into the wall his mother's garden had taught me how to be. I could not scream. I did not need to. I had a child to shield and a body to do it with, and my blood came down onto the floor of the great hall, and I did not let go. Then the king's second, Varick, had Dacian down, and the guard had his men, and the king had both of us, his son and the servant girl, bleeding over him, and it was over. It shook the realm, and the shaking was the point. A king does not break a great alliance lightly. To refuse a treaty with a northern power on the word of a mute servant and a 6-year-old is the kind of thing that could have meant war. And Orrin did it anyway because he had learned in his wife's garden and his son's rusty voice to listen to the people he had spent his life speaking over. Alpha Dacian was exposed, and once the king's men went looking, my memory was not the only evidence. A warlord who has raised homes leaves a trail, and others who had survived him, hearing that the Iron Reach had turned on him, found their courage. His crimes came out, the alliance died, and with it his standing, and he was given to a justice long overdue. The realm learned that the truth does not only come in the voices of the powerful, that sometimes it lives, whole and waiting behind the silence of those everyone has agreed not to hear, and that a wise king learns to read the wordless. It made the court look again at the servants it had spoken over. It should have. My wound healed slow and left a long scar, and I find I do not mind it. It is the second best thing that Garden gave me. The best was a boy's voice, spent first and bravest on a girl who had none. It is a year now, as I set this down. I set everything down in ink, because ink is the voice I have, and I am Luna of the Iron Reach, which the court has decided to find touching rather than admit. It cannot fathom a queen who has never said a word. Finn talks now, all the time, the way a child does who has found his words again and means to use everyone. But here is the thing that undoes me still. He never stopped speaking our other language too, the wordless one, the signs, and the glances, and the pipe. He did not trade his silence with me for his voice with the world. He kept both, and he uses the wordless one with me always, so that his mute mother is never the only one in the room with no words. He learned to sign so fluently that he speaks for me when I need a voice in the loud world and falls silent with me when I do not. And I did not know, until a 6-year-old taught me, that being loved is simply someone choosing to meet you in whatever language you have. Orrin is not a cold man. I know the songs say iron, and there is iron in him still. But the wall came down in his wife's garden, and he has not rebuilt it, and the proud king who once demanded his son be fixed has become a father who sits beside locked doors and waits, and a husband who has learned to read a silent wife so closely that I have never in a year of marriage felt unheard, which is a thing I did not know a voiceless woman was allowed to feel. We tend the Luna's garden together, the three of us, and I play my pipe in it, and Finn laughs, and sometimes the Iron King laughs too, and the dead place is the most alive place in the palace. He came to find me just now, where I was writing this by the fire, and read over my shoulder the way he is not supposed to and always does, and signed to me, he signs now, my proud king, clumsily, lovingly, asking what I was setting down. I wrote for him to read that I was setting down the story of the morning he heard laughter in the garden and followed it. He was quiet a moment, in the way that used to read as a king's cold iron, and that I now know is a once-walled man choosing a true word over an easy one. He touched the scar the blade left the way he does, and then he did not sign. He spoke, because he wanted me to hear it aloud, even though I could not answer aloud. You keep writing that you gave my son back his voice, he said. The mute girl who taught the silent boy to laugh, who sat beside his locked door until it opened, and you did. But I will tell you what you actually gave, because you are too humble to write it. He held my hand over the scar. You had no voice, Runa, and you were the truest thing that ever happened to this family. You taught a grieving boy that he was allowed to be silent, and a proud man that he was allowed to be broken, and both of us that love does not need words. I spent half a year demanding my son speak, certain that his silence was the wrong thing to fix, and a girl who could not speak at all showed me that the silence was never the wound. The wound was being alone in it. You did not give Finn his voice, you gave him company in his silence until the voice came back on its own, and then, when it came, the first thing he did with it was give it to you. So do not write that the voiceless girl gave my son his words. Write that she taught all three of us the only thing worth knowing, which is that no one should have to be silent alone. So I will leave you with the question I still turn over, and I would truly love to know what you think. Write it, and I will read every one, because reading is how I listen. Finn broke half a year of silence to be my voice when I had none, and the whole realm calls it a miracle, the grieving prince healed at last. But I have wondered on the long nights whether I healed him at all, or whether it was simpler and stranger than that, whether two people with no words did not fix each other so much as recognize each other and stop being alone, and whether the voice and the laughter were not a cure, but only what happens naturally once you are no longer the only silent one in the room. So, did I give Finn back his words? Or did we simply keep each other company in the dark until the dark became bearable, and the words were only what grew there after? Tell me your verdict below, and comment asterisk, 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 endia, asterisk, 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 if you want to stay in it with us a while longer. And I will tell you next what happened when the realm's other silenced ones, the mute, the stammering, the ones no one waits to hear, began arriving at our gates, and a king who had finally learned to listen to the quiet. So if there is someone in your life who has gone silent, wherever you are listening from tonight, do not try to fix them. Do not demand their words. Just sit beside the locked door, wanting nothing, and let them know they are not the only silent one in the room. It is the whole of what I know, and I learned it without ever saying a word. A mute girl and a silent boy taught a kingdom that the quiet is not empty, it is only waiting for company.